Major phone carriers make you sign contracts with rigid data plans to trap you into a kind of forced phonogamy. Sounds pretty insecure if you ask me. At Consumer Cellular, we believe in a more consensual and healthy form of phonogamy, free of contracts and more flexible to your data needs. This way, you stick around not because we force you to with contracts and fees, but because you love our phone plans. Like ardently love our phone plans. Phonogamously. Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we're going to get into the Orioles pitching depth as they head into the 2024 season with a special focus on the starting rotation. Among the topics we're going to cover are Grayson Rodriguez and Kyle Bradish and the roles that they're going to play on the 2024 team. The remaining pitchers who are with the Orioles, and why the Orioles might or might not make a move before the 2024 season begins. We're going to start first, though, with the 2023 season. Orioles win 101 games, capture the American League East, and without a doubt, two big reasons for that were Kyle Bradish and Grayson Rodriguez. Bradish took a massive step forward from a solid but often inconsistent rookie season in 2022 to really become the Orioles' best starter in 2023, posting a 2.83 ERA across 168 and two-thirds innings pitched, striking out 168 batters while walking 44, and earning some love in Cy Young voting as he ranked fourth in the American League. Rodriguez, meanwhile, overcame a very challenging start and a demotion to Norfolk to reemerge as one of the Orioles' more electric and sometimes best starters over the summer, and had some big wins for the Orioles in the second half of the season. Did struggle in the playoffs, but nonetheless ended his rookie season, regular season at least, on a high note. And what prompted us to take a look at this topic tonight was a really informative piece in the Baltimore Banner recently by friend of the show, Andy Koska. Andy got a chance to talk to Grayson Rodriguez a little bit about what his approach is going to be in 2024 and how he's been gearing up for next season. And one of the things that was clear from this article is expect more fastballs of the four-seam and the two-seam variety from him. And Andy breaks down some of the starts last year where Rodriguez was successful while relying heavily on the fastball. And we'll get into that a little bit here in a minute. But Nick, I'll start with you and we'll focus on Rodriguez. There were some ups and downs, but I think overall we feel good about how he ended last season. What adjustments do you think he can make to be even better in 2024?
First of all, I wanted to picture Grayson Rodriguez, like in Andy's article, great piece. I just picture him sitting like at home in his, I don't know if he's got like a home movie theater. I don't know if he's got some dark room that's just his. I don't know, but just watching his starts. And Andy talked about how he goes pitch by pitch and he'll watch the broadcast and then kind of second guess, like, okay, what am I going to throw now with this newfound knowledge? What am I going to throw against this guy? And kind of breaking down these starts that way. I just picture him like watching these starts, like with a cigar, sitting back, just laughing. Like these guys have no idea what's coming next year with this stuff. I'm jacked after reading that article. You rattled off some of the numbers there. The 2.58 ERA in the second half of the year, 0.35 home run per nine rate, which that was what, like 2.5 or 3 in his first stint in the major leagues. The K rate did drop, but the walk rate dropped significantly as well. And just the last 3 starts, 18 and two-thirds innings, struck out 19, walked just 3 guys, and gave up just 3 earned runs. And that included that 8 innings of shutout ball with no walks against the Rays. Amazing. Projections actually like Grayson over Bradish this year, which I think is entirely fair. Like we saw Bradish struggle. He hit the IL. Maybe it was the phantom IL. I don't know. But whatever it was, it worked because he came back, dominated his second stint. That was last year, 2 years ago. Comes out in year 2 and he just shoved. Grayson struggled but flashed, was sent down, fixed things, came back up and shoved over. We're talking about a pretty decently sized sample in that second half of the year when he pitched. If he takes that same sort of leap this season, like he's going to emerge as the top dog in this rotation, pending a trade, of course. But we're just looking at the guys who are on this roster now. He's going to emerge as the top dog in this rotation and blossom into that number one guy who I think of prospects. He was the top pitching prospect in baseball for a couple of years there. We're starting to see that Grayson emerge at the major league level. And the ceiling is just, I can't see it. It's so high with Grayson, to be honest.
Yeah. More fastballs. It sounds great because he's got a great one. He's got a great fastball, a lot of hop. I think it really comes down to the fastball command. And I think if he can command it better, and especially if he's going to throw a sinker into the mix, a two-seamer, that can really keep hitters off balance. And his already great changeup could play up even more if they're thinking, man, it's going to be a fastball, up, change up, pull the string on him, see you later. I really think the rest will come into place if he focuses on that fastball and spotting it where he wants to. We know he's got great other pitches as well, but I think that's a really good decision. And I think, man, I can't believe baseball's 3 weeks away. I'm getting finally starting to believe it now that we've said it a bunch tonight. And yeah, I really want to see how Bradish and Rodriguez lead this rotation. I think they're both under contract with the Orioles for Bradish for 5 more seasons, Rodriguez for 6. It's gonna be a nice little run at the top of that rotation here.
Let's talk about Bradish for a minute. What are your expectations for him going into next year? Because we were pretty high on Bradish when he was in the minor leagues, and we had people in the Orioles organization who, Matt Blood among them, who would talk up Bradish any chance that they got as a starter. And despite some of the doubts that kind of lingered even through his first year in the major leagues, he is showing that he can stick in a major league rotation. What do you think the next step forward looks like for him?
Well, yeah, it's so true that Matt Blood, it was like, it's not Grayson Rodriguez, DL Hall. Oh yeah. And Matt Bradish or Kyle Bradish. It's Grayson Rodriguez, DL Hall and Kyle Bradish. He put them in the same league, the same sentence. And that turned out to be very fortuitous. And yeah, Bradish might have got a lot of love for the AL Cy Young last year, 4th place, but he's certainly not getting a lot of love as far as predicting him to be a potential Cy Young winner in 2024, because he's not in the top 10 of any of these lists I've seen with odds and predictions and stuff, which is such a slap in the face for a guy who I think had the second best stuff plus numbers in the second half period. And you could just see his game planning is better. The stuff is crisper. It's just, he knows what he's doing now. He always had the stuff, but now he knows what to throw and when and how to set people up and put them down. And I think that's only going to improve as he continues to be in the prime of his pitching career. So yeah, it's going to be fun to see who's better between Bradish and Rodriguez in 2024. My money's on Bradish just because he's got that extra experience and time, and he's proven to himself and to everyone else that he's done it. He can do it again. But yeah, Kyle Bradish, he's the ace that the Orioles don't need to trade for, and we'll see if they actually will try to trade for a secondary one as well.
Yeah, as high as I am on Bradish, I do wonder how much more of a ceiling is there with him? Genuinely, I'd be curious, someone who can break him down a little bit more, right? Is how much more can we get out of his stuff? I think he kind of, if you look at some of the expected stats, it kind of suggests he may have overperformed a little bit last year. And I think maybe that's why, if you look at some of the projections, they're kind of a little bit lower on him. I think they're kind of baking him towards regressing a little bit next year. I don't see him regressing to a 2-WAR pitcher or something next year. I still think he's going to be a very dominant starter. I'm just genuinely curious about how much more of a ceiling we see out of him next year. But I mean, he's coming into this year. I didn't realize, just kind of comparing him to some other guys, I didn't realize just how good some of his numbers were. The 2.83 ERA, obviously fantastic. Near 50% ground ball rate, strikeout rate, 3.8 WAR. That 3.8 WAR ranked 16th in all of baseball, which was ahead of Jesus Luzardo, Dylan Cease, Corbin Burns, Luis Castillo, Kodai Senga. Like a lot of those guys are people the Orioles fans have been clamoring the Orioles to trade for this year. Bradish was higher war, worth more than all those guys last year. I'm not saying in any way that means we should not trade for those guys. Trade for Jesus Luzardo right now. Let's do part 3 podcast tonight. I'm down. But just to highlight, like Bradish was really, really good. And he is up in that upper tier of pitchers in baseball. And this guy was tagged as a relief prospect like 3 years ago. And Orioles pitching development coming through clutch with Bradish. And hopefully we see that same rise with Grayson Rodriguez this year.
One thing that I think is going to be really important for the Orioles is to get innings out of their starters. And I look at Bradish in particular, 168 and 2/3 innings last year, over 30 starts. I think it's reasonable that in year 3, you're going to look for that number to climb. Now, if you look at his Baseball Savant page, the expected ERA for Bradish last season is 3.77. That doesn't get him a 4th place vote or a 4th place finish in Cy Young voting, but that's still a good year. If you got, let's say, a mid-3s ERA, but he did it over 185 innings or over 190 innings as compared to 168, would you consider that some level of success?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ERA, there's only so much you control in that. Like, as long as he's giving us those quality innings, like you said, like if he's giving you Jordan Lyles, Kyle Gibson style innings with obviously a full run and a half better ERA, I will take that every day of the week. And that's the one thing I guess you can say the Orioles are missing is that workhorse ace. I think Kyle Bradish established himself as a 1/2 starter in the big leagues last year, but can he be the guy that's Garrett Cole? No one really pitches 200 innings anymore, I feel like, this day and age, but approaching 200 innings while still, ERA in the 3s, just like you're going out there, you're reliable. You're going to get 6 to 7 innings of a game where you're going to be in it no matter what. Like that's what the Orioles need. And I think Bradish could be that guy. I think Rodriguez could certainly be that guy. But I would be happy to answer your question.
Yeah, I think we can talk about the rest of the rotation here momentarily where there's a lot more question marks. But just looking at the top 2 right now as it stands, you're looking at the innings. Grayson had 163 innings between AAA and the MLB level. Bradish had 168. If both these guys can get that 180 to 190 plus range this season, that's going to make a huge difference, I think. And you've got the playoff experience as well. Grayson touched on that in Andy's article, like getting that pressure, understanding that energy that was at Camden Yards. And that was something that I kind of assumed with these younger guys, they could succumb to that kind of pressure because yes, you're playing at home, but it's a different type of energy when you're talking about a sold out stadium in the playoffs. These guys expect that now. They know exactly what that's going to feel like. And if they're set up really nice to go 180 plus innings this year, get that same level of production. We see Grayson. We see more second half Grayson next year. You got the top 2 at least, if that stays the same over the course of the year, which hopefully it doesn't. But if it is just those 2 guys, you're looking at one of the best duos, I think, in Major League Baseball. One that's definitely like top 10 duos in baseball.
If you look at the pitchers that are on the Orioles roster now, there's 2 more that I think you're pretty safe to pencil into starting rotation spots, health permitting. And that's Dean Kramer, who among pitchers returning from 2023 threw the most innings last year. Kyle Gibson led the team with 192 innings pitched, but Kramer was behind him at 172 and 2/3. And then you have Means, who now will be a year removed from Tommy John surgery. He got some major league time in last year, 23 and 2/3 innings pitched before the season ended, and was generally effective, even if it didn't look like his stuff was all the way back at times. So if Means is healthy and Kramer continues to do what Kramer does, which is, some starts will be a little bit frustrating, but then he also seems to have a knack for pulling out a big start when you need it. How much would that help the Orioles?
it's that's huge because honestly, when looking at this rotation as a whole, all the confidence in the world in 1 and 2, and then after that, like I don't feel confident in this rotation. Honestly, it is that confidence level is extremely low just because like Means pitched 155 innings in 2019. And then since then, it's been 43 innings, 146 innings, 8 innings, 23 innings. He had the hiccup when coming back from Tommy John surgery last year. I think 2 hiccups coming back in his return from Tommy John surgery. A guy who already has an injury history. I love the guy, but I just don't have much faith in him being a productive number 3 on a team that should be a World Series contender this season. And then with Kramer, I think he's fine if he's like number 5 in your rotation for this year. And we've talked about before, you mentioned the highs. He's got his highs, he's got his lows, but they kind of even out over the course of the season. If he can be a 1.5 WAR pitcher who throws 198 innings a year, that's great. That's a solid number 5 guy. I feel like the Dean Kramer gang is a pretty strong and loyal following. I just don't have those passionate feelings about Dean. I think he's a fine regular season pitcher to put in at number 5, but like the rest of this rotation is just 3 through 5 as a whole it scares me, to be completely honest.
Yeah, and it's why I feel like it's just such a no-brainer to get a guy to put in between Bradish and Rodriguez and Means and Kramer. I think Means and Kramer look so much better at 4 and 5 rather than 3 and 4. I think Kramer can be like the Kyle Gibson, Jordan Lyles in-house like himself. I think he could be the innings eater type of guy at the bottom of a rotation for this team if they go ahead and get someone like a Luzardo, a Cease, whoever it is, Brian Wu, Bryce Miller. Means, yeah, he looked really good, especially that Guardians game. He almost threw another no-hitter. Obviously, it's a little scary that his elbow barked at him again at the end of the season, couldn't get him in the playoffs. But I do think that could just be like, I don't know. I'm going to be optimistic and say that was just kind of like it happens and he'll be fine in spring training. But you can't count on him to give you 150 plus innings. You just can't. So you have Cole Irvin, obviously, as we'll get to, which I think he's a little underrated at this point, Mr. Cole Irvin. But yeah, I agree. We need someone in the middle, and hopefully that happens before the season starts.
Yeah, I think the best case scenario for Kramer right now is that he develops into the kind of pitcher that keeps you from having to go out and sign the Jordan Lyles or the Kyle Gibson of that year's free agent class, because he can be the consistent 185, 190 innings arm that's down towards the bottom of your rotation, who nothing he does is really flashy. And he's going to have some real clunkers, but for the most part, he's going to keep you in games. And then with Means, I agree with both of you. It would be great to see him bounce back, but I'm not counting on him going out there and picking up and being the John Means of 2019, because I think it's going to realistically be maybe 145, 150 innings. If you get that, I think you consider that a success. And of course, you've got a lot to think about in terms of how you're going to make up those innings and whether you're going to do it internally, externally, or maybe a little bit of both. And you got to put a lot of thought into it.
You know what would help you make that decision when you're thinking about how you're going to replace those innings? Magic Mind. Of course. I don't know about you guys, but I've been worried about not having enough energy to stay on top of work and family responsibilities, keeping up with 2 toddlers running around the house, and then dedicating enough time to producing the amount of content that we do, as we're running on hour number 2 here tonight. But I have stayed on my Magic Mind routine, which is helping. These small, all-natural energy shots, super easy to use. They taste great. They've helped me cut out the afternoon coffee, and now our content schedule has ramped back up again. I haven't been worried about finding enough energy for late-night recordings and writings. Magic Mind makes me more productive and more focused. I get more done in less time thanks to the nootropics inside that improve attention, concentration, and cognition, all without the jittery side effects. With all natural ingredients like matcha and lion's mane mushrooms, I would really encourage everyone listening to try it out as well if you're having trouble being at a 100% some days. It's been a game changer for me, and I think it can be for everyone listening as well. Only during the month of January, Magic Mind is helping you crush your 2024 New Year's resolutions fully focused. Everyone listening can get 1 month free when you're subscribing for 3 months at magicmind.com/JANOTV and use our exclusive code OTV20. It's an extra 20% off, which gets you up to 75% off. This only lasts until the end of January, so hurry up before it goes away. magicmind.com/JANOTV and use our code OTV20 for additional savings.
We'll go now to how the Orioles are going to fill that fifth and final spot in the rotation, because it has been really the hot button issue of this offseason. The hope, anticipation that the Orioles are going to trade for a frontline starter so far has not come to fruition. Meanwhile, you have a lot of solid arms coming back, but they're all guys with major question marks going into 2024, and a free agent market with pitching that is really thin when you get past the top two guys left on the board in Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery, neither of whom seem like likely targets for the Orioles. So we're going to take this part of the episode to really dive into that. And the first thought that comes to mind is the trade possibilities. Dylan Cease has been a name that has been widely connected to the Orioles throughout this offseason. He hasn't moved yet. The sense seems to be that the White Sox have a very high asking price for him, and they may be content to ride into the season with Cease, have him pitch on their bad team for the first half of the year, and see if they can get their asking price at the trade deadline. One thing I will caution, though, and I'm going to turn this over to you guys after this to get your thoughts on this. This offseason has moved at a glacial pace, and you're going to have a week or two where there is basically a month's worth of activity sometime here in the next 3 weeks. It's going to happen. And at that point, if the White Sox are serious about trading Dylan Cease, they're going to trade him. If they don't really care to move him, they'll ride that out and they'll go into the season. But I wouldn't look at the fact that he hasn't been moved yet and draw the conclusion, okay, he's not being traded. Asking price is too high. This offseason, despite the fact that we're now months into it, feels like it's barely started.
So true. It's agonizing. Yeah, I would put money on the White Sox are going to trade Dylan Cease before the season starts. I don't care what anyone says. Oh, I think the White Sox are taking their ball and going home and they're being unreasonable. Yeah, of course they are, because they have no reason not to be right now. I think it's a little bit stupid. I think they probably should have just traded him by now. They've apparently received some pretty good offers, some pretty fair offers, and I don't think they can just like will Dylan Cease into being an ace who deserves like some monumental package. I mean, this is a guy that had one amazing year, and he's had a couple other decent years. Last year was iffy. I think he got a little bit unlucky as far as like the peripherals, and he pitched better than I think the overall numbers say. But I just don't think they can trade him as an ace when he's more of a middle of the rotation guy, I think. And they'd be stupid not to trade him before the season starts. I just think it's way too much risk. What if he is mediocre again in the first half? What if he gets hurt? They're in the middle of a rebuild. There's no reason for them not to trade him. So I do think he will be traded. The Orioles it seems like it's inevitable. It seems like it's the perfect fit. I would personally rather go out and even if it's spending more on Jesus Luzardo, that's what I would do. Or I'd love to get one of those Mariners guys, as we've said a lot this offseason. But yeah, I do think Dylan Cease will probably be an Oriole by the time the season gets here, but you can't count on it because it is the White Sox. And if they are going to keep those demands and do something stupid like go into the season with him in the rotation when they're expected to be like the worst team in the league, then that's on them. But I think ultimately, like we have said on this podcast, the Orioles can beat any offer. It doesn't like they might not love our best offer right now, but I think when they get all the pitchers are off the market and everyone's got their best offer out for Dylan Cease, I think the Orioles are going to have that best offer and they're going to take it.
Yeah, if you're looking at like external options, I mean, who's left on the free agent market? It's definitely not anything super enticing. I don't want to pay the money that Jordan Montgomery is going to command. There's that debate on, do you go after the top guy or do you try to fill in the back of the rotation, stabilize the back of the rotation more with like a Hinge Ryu or one of these guys like that? I'd probably prefer let's just make the move and get the top of the rotation arm instead. Let's show that we're entering a new phase here in Baltimore. Honestly, the C stuff is fun. I've been buying Cease in best ball drafts, hoping that he does get traded to Baltimore and the strikeouts go up and he becomes the workhorse who's 200 plus innings for the Orioles. But I don't know. I'm kind of moving on to the Miami side of things, to be honest, as well, just because for whatever reason, the Marlins every single year, like I don't put together a ranking of college hitters, or college players come draft time, but I have a list probably 100, 150 deep of like just my guys that I watched, that I studied, that I'm familiar with. And I swear it seems like every year the Marlins will just pick off the top guy that's left on my list every year. And I love their draft classes. Now, I'm not saying they're taking the best guys, but they're taking guys that I just fall in love with during the college season. And you look at this rotation and some of the pitching depth they have on the farm, it's good. It's Jesus Luzardo. It's Yuri Perez. And I know they're probably not going to trade him, or Braxton Garrett. I've been buying a ton of Braxton Garrett, by the way. But, Edward Cabrera, it's no Max Meyer. Like, they've got a ton of quality pitching here. They've got no bats. Like, Jazz Chisholm can't stay healthy. Jazz Chisholm should be marketed more across baseball. I'll be the first one to say that. Not the only one to say that, but I will say that loud and proud. But he just can't stay healthy. Like, you're relying on like Brian De La Cruz and John Birdie to be the majority of your offense, or a big chunk of your offense. You need help. And you look at their prospect list. I was looking at it today. Yeah, it's Noble Meyer, Thomas White, Max Meyer at the top. That's solid. But your top hitting prospect is Jacob Berry, Victor Mesa Jr., Kemp Alderman, and Brock Vandenberg are in your top 10. You need hitters. It all just makes so much sense. Like, the Orioles are loaded with hitters. The Marlins need hitters. The Marlins have a lot of really fun pitchers. The Orioles need fun pitchers and good pitchers, preferably. But it just makes so much sense. I'd rather just let's splurge and go after some of these Marlins guys. The Seattle stuff makes a ton of sense too. Like, why, if you're Seattle, if you're Jerry Dipoto, why don't you just sign the homegrown guy in Blake Snell? You have an abundance of quality, high quality pitchers on that roster. Trade one of them. You need offensive help as well. Everything just lines up so perfectly for the Orioles, but it does take two to tango. The Orioles have their evaluations of other teams' prospects, and they have obviously their own evaluations of their own prospects. The Mariners, the Marlins, the White Sox, they all have their evaluations of Orioles prospects. It's a matter of it matching up, and that's a very difficult thing to do. But that's what makes it extra frustrating, is there are all these scenarios that are just perfect for a trade opportunity, and it's not happening yet. But like Zach said, we're going to see an entire offseason happen in like 1 week, a 1 week span. Anything can still happen. But yeah, it is. I feel the frustrations it's the same frustrations a lot of Orioles fans of like something should happen, because I don't feel confident again in this rotation as we enter the year.
When I look at the trade market broadly, I do think that there are options out there other than Cease, and the Mariners and the Marlins are the first two organizations I'm going to look at. And from the Marlins' perspective in particular, the Orioles are an attractive trade partner because they have so many bats that are either on the cusp of being major league ready or are major league ready and just can't fit into this lineup right now. And the Marlins' track record lately with hitters is terrible out of their farm system. I think they draft well. I agree with you, Nick. I like generally coming out of their drafts, like what they have, but they just have not been able to turn that into a homegrown player who has sustained success for them at the major league level. So why not get a guy who's been developing in another system, bring him in and hope it works, especially because I think that Luzardo is a little bit different. I think that if you trade Luzardo, you are taking a big step back for next year. But they could trade Edward Cabrera, who isn't a perfect fit for the Orioles, but it's a trade I would understand if they went out to get him. You could trade Cabrera, get a couple of hitters back, and still be competitive next year. The Mariners are in a very similar position with pitchers like Miller and Wu. They could trade either one of those guys and still be competitive. And that's, in my opinion, with or without Blake Snell. So those two teams have some flexibility. And if the Orioles want to move on from the White Sox, and I don't think for a second they've only been focused on Cease, but if they know it's not going to work with the White Sox, those are two organizations that I would turn to immediately. And I will say this with the White Sox. One thing I try to think about this from their perspective recently. I have to wonder how much of Chris Getz is nervous that if he doesn't get the Cease trade right, the rebuild's going to get off to a bad start, because you look at that Major League roster, and assuming they're not moving Luis Robert anytime soon, there is nothing else there that's going to attract another team to give you a boatload of prospects. Nothing.
You can't will tradable players into existence. You just got to hope they kind of show up. When you sign the guy for a 1-year deal, try to rebound and trade him at the deadline. I don't know what to tell him, but like I was saying, like, you just can't say this is all we got. So you're going to have to give us 4 top 100 prospects. No, it's just not going to work that way. Joey Ortiz, it's like made to be a Marlin. I just could see it, like him in that jersey, in that environment. Like, God, I would love to see that. Heston Kjerstad would do wonders for that offense. Like Heston Kjerstad, Joey Ortiz, I don't know, Judd Fabian, and maybe one more person if they want for Jesus Luzardo. Let's go. Come on. Or even do a double package where Edward Cabrera could be another high leverage bullpen arm. I think he would be incredible to move to the bullpen, and then could also be a guy that, like the Hall, could start eventually too. So yeah, there's just so, and who knows, maybe there's a guy like Mitch Keller or some random guy who's available and we don't even know it, and the Orioles will get him. So it's like you said, it's probably going to be February 10th and off season started. Okay, here we go.
Yeah. And I know it's different because in this instance, the White Sox traded a prospect for a proven major league starter. So this would be a little reverse of that. But, you know, if you're Getz, you're the new guy. You don't want to be the guy who makes this version of the Fernando Tatis Jr. trade, right? Like for trading away Fernando Tatis Jr. for James Shields. I don't know. But I am looking at a tweet here right now that says, once again, Domingo Germán's name is coming up, and that the former Yankee is in talks with 6 teams, including the AL East Blue Jays and Orioles, and he has offers on the table, apparently. So
please,
this episode's already out there.
And please let this be, hey, we will sign this guy if you don't accept our offer.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good point now to get to the free agent market, which is pretty thin at this point. And really, when I look beyond that Snell and Montgomery tier, I really think that if you're signing one of these pitchers, you're buying time. You're hoping that Ryu or Michael Lorenzen can come in and give you a good first half so that there's someone there to kind of prop up the rotation before you make the move at the deadline, which you're still going to have to do. And maybe it just would boil down to the Orioles comparing Lorenzen to some of their in-house options like Tyler Wells and Cole Irvin, or looking at Ryu in comparison to Irvin and Bruce Zimmerman as left-handers, and feeling more confident in one of those guys being able to get them through the first few months. That's not the best way to approach your starting rotation by a long shot, but I think that short of a trade, that's the path the Orioles are going to have to take unless they want to go entirely with this group that they have now.
Yeah. I mean, there are some guys here on this list that, since we just saw that's Domingo Germán report, they're going to be guys in that tier that the Orioles, I think, should sign. And it's probably going to happen within the next week or so, obviously. And Orioles fans are going to be in an uproar. But I think the Orioles should sign one or two of these guys as like to replace the Spencer Watkins, right? Spencer Watkins is gone. And when you look at Norfolk's roster, there's not that veteran guy down there. So as far as like depth options, yeah, sign one or two of these guys, try to get them in AAA. So you got the emergency, because right now you're just looking at straight prospects who I love all these guys who are going to be in Norfolk's rotation. It's going to be deep. It's going to be high quality guys. It's going to be fringe top 100 prospects, but they're unproven. So you do need some veteran guys down there in Norfolk to help. You're going to need them at some point. It's a long season. But I just think at this point, like as far as improving the major league rotation, at the beginning of the offseason, I probably would have said I'm okay with that. But at this point, it's like just make the deal and let's go for the top. Let's go for the top guy and really improve this rotation, because you could piecemeal this thing together, right? If you stand pat, Bradish and Grayson at the top. Hopefully John Means gets you that 140, 150 innings. Kramer is Kramer again. And then you piecemeal it with Wells, Irvin, Hall, whoever in the 5 spot, plus some of these prospects making their debut. But then once you get to the playoffs, I think we're just right back to where we were last year, where the bats could do it, but the pitching is not going to get you through the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah, I think, Nick, that's a fair point. That, if you want to go out and get, let's, say an Eric Lauer to pitch at Norfolk, I think that's a perfectly reasonable move. And they are going to have to make one or two moves like that. I'll put this out in specific terms, though. Would you feel more comfortable with signing a free agent that's kind of the Michael Lorenzen mold, where you look at his year last year, he was an all-star, pitched really well for Detroit over the first 4 months of the season, then got traded to Philadelphia, struggled there, and I believe he was not even on the postseason roster for the Phillies. Would you prefer that the Orioles take a chance on a guy like that, or would you feel comfortable with Tyler Wells, stick him in the rotation at the start of the year, and see just how far you can take him?
Worst comes to worst, yeah, I'll sign someone, even if it's like a Michael Lorenzen, just to have that in case of injuries. You don't know if John Means' elbow barks at him again and he's out. What if, I don't know, DL Hall is not going to cut it in the rotation during spring training? There's just too many things where you don't want to have to rely on like a Cade Povich, Chase McDermott early in the season. That would be kind of not ideal. So if they can't come up with a trade of some sort, I would definitely bring in someone. Just even if it's like, what's the guy that Boston signed that was with Cleveland for so long last year? It's all on the tip of my tongue, but he pitched against the Orioles opening day, I think, or the day after. But yeah, even if it's someone like that or like a super cheap deal or minor league deal, you're gonna have to bring in some extra arms.
Corey Kluber, I think you're thinking of. He's out there.
Yeah, thank you, Garrett Kluber. I mean, I would hold my nose and do it, but I think you gotta need some bodies at some point.
Yeah, I'm fine with bringing in some guy, even if just for competition, and see what happens. Just because, like, I know I've been very pro DL Hall should stick in the bullpen, but if you're not gonna, because again, he's shown that floor of being that elite late inning guy. But if you're not going to bring in anybody and you are going to use Hall in the rotation, like as much as I get on here and say Hall's a reliever, put him in the bullpen, he's your 8th inning guy. At the same time, I'm going to come on here and cry real tears of joy if we're sitting here in June, July talking about DL Hall, the starter, who's like shoving and actually being productive in that role because of the amount of energy that we have put into following DL Hall of these it's felt like a decade he's been in this organization. I want him to succeed in whatever role he can get in. But I will say, like, the fastball velo did increase late last year as he started working his way back. And he was able to increase or improve those secondary pitches and throw more strikes with those secondary pitches. He's got the curveball back. He's got a good slider. He's got a plus changeup. I vividly remember watching that changeup develop when he was down there in Bowie and that becoming a supreme strikeout pitch for him at the AA level as he was coming up. DL Hall's got the skills, I think, to cut it in the rotation. And honestly, like, he's going to be your best shot. I think if you're not going to add anybody, that's your best shot, because I do agree with what Bob said that Cole Irvin is a little bit underrated. I think he showed great improvement at the end of last year, but I almost wonder if he's kind of optimized. You're going to get the most value out of him as that swingman role. Tyler Wells, like, just again, love the guy, but he hasn't shown for 2 straight years now that he can't finish a season. And you can't convince me that this big guy who's 29, 30 years old now is just suddenly going to throw 160 innings in your rotation this year. Like, Bruce Zimmerman is not an option in any way. He's just not. So, like, DL Hall is your best option if no one else is, if they're not going to bring anybody else. It's a good option, but still, that's a big question mark.
Jonathan Heasley season, baby. We traded for him for a reason. No. Yeah, DL Hall, that is the one, like, wild card. What if he is going to come in to spring training, win that job, and your top 3 is Bradish, Rodriguez, and Hall? I mean, that would be awesome, but I don't think you can count on it by any means. I think you come in and you let him stretch out, but ultimately you have to probably realize he's going to be in the bullpen. Tyler Wells, like Zach said, you could, in the beginning of the season, try to do it again first half and maybe plan it where you don't have to get to that dead arm period. You can kind of plan and at a certain point just shift him to the bullpen. I could see that, but I do think he'd be better just being in the bullpen overall. And I agree, Irvin ideally would be a swingman who can spot start here and there. Yeah.
Could you do it? Could you imagine, though? Take a second and let's be super optimistic here. It's January. Could you imagine of all franchises, all 30 MLB franchises, the Baltimore Orioles are the team that rolls out a rotation of 3. I'm going to consider Kyle Bradish homegrown because we basically developed into who he is. 3 guys of Grayson Rodriguez, DL Hall, and Kyle Bradish at the top of your rotation. Like, that would be amazing. Long shot again. DL Hall's got the big question mark, but potentially, I don't know.
Yeah, Hall, there's no question that if you want to go on pure upside, Hall is your best option for the rotation. I think where I sort of find myself in conflict with that idea is that it's been a while since we've really seen him have a full, healthy season. And I don't know, number one, how many innings you can expect out of him this season or how many innings you can get out of him going forward. And this is a short-term thing, and I may come back to regret this thought, but I kind of want an insurance policy for Craig Kimbrell. If Kimbrell just isn't getting the job done and Hall looks the way that he did late last year, he's now your closer. And I think that would be one of the best moves you could make. And Wells kind of in a similar camp because he has not gotten through that. I do think you could try it again and see if it works. But then if you have Wells in even a mid-inning role, that could do a lot of good for your bullpen depth. So that's one thought in my mind for why the Orioles should go get another starter is that bridge to get to the 9th inning and even in the 9th inning is a lot better if you have DL Hall and Tyler Wells in the bullpen.
Yeah. And two, with Hall, like, okay, maybe he's a 5 and dive guy. You know, I feel like just a couple of years ago, you get tagged 5 and dive guy, like that's got that pretty big negative connotation, right? He's a fringe starting pitching prospect. Now I feel like that's just baseball. So if you can get 5 DL Hall quality innings where the walk rate remains respectable like it was in the bullpen, I'm fine. I don't need DL Hall to go 7, 8 innings in his starts. But then that's where, you get into this situation of, is it going to tax the bullpen as the season progresses? I don't know. I just feel like the Orioles have the pieces to piecemeal this thing together. And maybe DL Hall does pop. Maybe Tyler Wells does keep that stamina up. Maybe Cole Irvin does take a step forward. Maybe John Means does. That's a lot of maybes. Not all of that needs to happen, but maybe 1 or 2 of those things does happen, and you can piecemeal this thing to the end or to the trade deadline and then the trade happens. But I will say at least that the pieces are there for them to do that, if that's the path that the Orioles are ultimately going to take, and we have to wait till the trade deadline before the move is made.
But there's only so long and often you can kick the can down the road. Like eventually you're going to have to do something about the surplus at the Norfolk Baltimore level. It's not as like much of a rush as Orioles fans have thought ever since last offseason, but it's going to get here eventually. So yeah, I don't know. I'd rather just do it now personally.
Well, and as a reminder, we still got about 3 weeks of spring training, but the offseason in a lot of ways feels like it still hasn't begun. I mean, you have the reigning Cy Young Award winner from the National League still a free agent here as we're now pushing into late January. So still a lot can happen. And of course, we will be here to react to whatever does or doesn't happen. And we will be back next week. In the meantime, you can check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you can also head over to our Patreon community now and sign up at a paid level and have access to our daily Top 50 Prospects Countdown. We're rolling out a new episode every day. You're not going to want to miss that. And we're still fairly early into the list. Number 37 was just recorded earlier today, and we're still moving along there. Orioles on the Verge is part of the Believe Podcast Network. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge.